Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Dr. Stephanie Edwards. I am the Executive Director of the Boston Theological Interreligious Consortium, the BTI. Longest name ever. We were going for the gold. It's really wonderful to have you all here. This is also my home institution. I teach in the theology department here alongside some other people you'll hear from on this panel. I am looking directly at the age of 40. I am a white woman with short blonde hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a very great black suit. And I am so happy to be our moderator of our last panel today. One of the things that draws this group together is a really intersectional passion for our topic of our conference. The people here I've worked with in various forms in our area, and in order to expose some of their own stories themselves, I'm going to ask them to share a little bit of who they are for you and why they find themselves on this panel. I, like I said, am a theologian and practitioner here in Boston, and so I do a lot of interreligious programming, and a lot of that, of course, then intersects with different people and bodies and ways of being in the world. My specific academic interest is in mental health. I am also a social worker, and I work mostly with adult victims of crime who identify as women. In that work, I came to know and love the disability community, and my academic work is in Roman Catholic bioethics that intersects with my social work practice and disability theology. I'm going to first ask my panelists to my left to introduce themselves, give us a description of who they are, and similar to myself, how they found themselves sitting in front of you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meghan Hopkins. I am a white woman wearing a brown and white striped dress. I have long brown hair, green eyes, and you can visibly see my prosthetic leg. I have visible and invisible disabilities. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm here today because I am a PhD student here at Boston College. My primary area is in comparative theology. My focus specifically is on meditative and ritual practices in Christianity and Islam. I became interested in disability theology about 8 years ago when I became disabled myself, first sort of as a way of making meaning and understanding my acquired disability. And since then, my interest has grown and really been a foundation in which I engage other areas of theology and a way of connecting with the community at large and expanding how I understand the human person.
Hi, my name is Jenn Macy. I am 37. I'm wearing a black dress. I have brown curly hair that's shoulder length, and I am a power wheelchair user. I am here today, I think, because I am a local clergy person with a disability. I am the lead pastor of First Church Somerville in Davis Square. And I went through the ordination process in the United Church of Christ after beginning the ordination process in the Episcopal Church and bumping into some obstacles around my queerness and my disability. And got told by the UCC church that I was in at the time, come on over here and you will have a lot less problems. I don't know if that was true in real life, but I became ordained pretty quickly. I went to seminary right out of college, became ordained in my mid-20s, and have been serving in the greater Boston area for 11 years.
Hi. Okay, good. Hi, everyone. My name is Jarrett. You can call me Maddie. I am a short white woman with blonde curly hair. I'm wearing a beige set and a blue blazer, and I'm also wearing leg braces that are peeking out beneath the bottom of my pants to help me walk, and some white sneakers. I am a doctoral candidate here at Boston College in systematic theology. My research areas are eschatology and anthropology, and my upcoming, soon to be written, hopefully, dissertation will be on bringing into conversation crypt time from disability studies with eschatology and a little bit of anthropology as well. I'm here because I have had a congenital I have a congenital disability, and my journey into theology has been marked by, exploring what it means to be living with a progressive disability, and trying to figure out how that can inform how we live as a church, an academy. And in particular, I'm interested in bringing it to conversation with my Roman Catholic tradition. Okay, I could add more, but I think I'll stop there, Steph.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rose J. Percy. I use she, her pronouns, and I am wearing a blue and white striped shirt with blue jeans and brown shoes. I am a Black woman, and I graduated from Boston University School of Theology in January from a Master's of Sacred Theology program in spiritual formation. And I went back after getting my MDiv from the same institution because I had more questions about how race, racial identity, specifically racial trauma, influences our identity formation and how that informs how we think about vocation. So a lot of my work is really a study of vocation informed by conversations that I've encountered since 2020 as Black folks in particular have experienced racial fatigue, racial battle fatigue in the workplace, and have come to understand, like, I am not just what I do for work. I am a whole person. So what does that mean? And a lot of my work is trying to sort out or parse information, parse vocation out of the place that it's been kind of housed in conversations about work and occupation, and bring it back to an understanding of, like, vocation encompasses all these areas of our lives, including what we do for work, but also how we rest. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. So our title of our panel today covers a lot of ground: disability activism, academics, and ministry in Boston and beyond. So everything. But the reason we went with such a open-ended title was because we really wanted to lift up the different entry points that you've all just named in your own vocational journeys, but also not just how you live this out, like Rose just says, as a sense of work, but as a sense of self. And how those, we're going to go with the three for now. So we're doing activism, academics, and ministry. How those three intertwine with each other and how they are lived out in your life. If any of you would like to talk about the emphasis, perhaps, one of those catchment areas has in your life, and the ways in which you've all said they challenge and inform each other. And specifically, if you all have such rich and particular entry points into the panel, maybe some ways that are through story or example, your specific entry point into academics, activism, and ministry. And we will not go in order, so as the Spirit moves.
I'll take a gander. So as I thought about this question, I was like, is it possible to just say, like, none of the above? And in part because I think, and I wonder if some of you will have some ways of approaching these three spheres differently, informed by your embodiment and experience. When I think of academics, I think of how often, there are ideologies of, like, rigor, like scholasticism and disembodiment, when we venture into that space. So how do we approach that in a way that honors our humanity, and ministry And a lot of the ways that I approached my journey through seminary was to consider how my work would, happen outside of explicitly ecclesial spaces. So is it fair to call it ministry in that sense? And then when it comes to thinking about vocation outside of work, I'm often looking at how so often Black folks in particular, because we are, even if we have invisible disabilities, we are visibly Black. And so oftentimes we enter spaces in public and folks expect that because we are visibly Black, we are also able to articulate and talk about all kinds of things. And therefore we're always an activist and we're always defending our lives. And it's like, so how do we exist in our bodies as Black people in a way that allows us to sometimes not be an activist? So these are things that I consider. So when I thought about those terms, I was like, none of the above, but also all of the above, if we redefine them these ways.
So when I was thinking about this question, Stephanie, I was like, most obviously, I feel like I fit into the category of academics because that's my, well, what I have felt is my vocation through a lot of my life, to contribute to the academy through writing. But it's also really, really important to me that that remains grounded in particular experiences and communities. So I'm also involved in the Charcot-Marie-Tooth Association, which is like the disability they have, has a wonderful community that does Zoom meetings, and we have a camp every summer that I go to and that I'm a counselor at. So like cultivating relationships with people in my specific disability community is really important to me. And that has actually given me a lot of life, just like to stay sustained amidst the academic grind, which isn't always easy. And then in terms of the ministry piece, I used to be a high school teacher prior to entering the doctoral program. And although like my formal title was a teacher, and I'm sure that people in this room may be able to relate to this, I actually considered what I was doing a form of ministry, to be able to be there with my students through tumultuous years of high school was a sacred time for me, and I hope to carry that into college education as well. I do have thoughts on what it was like to be a disabled teacher in front of high schoolers, but maybe we can table that and we'll come back to it later if we want.
Looks like we're going to go in order anyway. So ministry would definitely be the one that I most easily align with. I had a call to ministry as a young person before I knew I was going to be diagnosed with a progressive disability. And then my call persisted throughout my experience of becoming disabled and then disabled in a different way over time. But that being said, I felt a real strong need especially when I was younger, to not be boxed in as a pastor with a disability, to be a pastor. And I think it led me to overcompensate in a lot of ways throughout my early career, and to feel like I had to do the best and be the best and also not live into my embodiment at all, to make my disability the least interesting thing about me, to not talk about why I was in a wheelchair, to not be a disabled person in spaces, so that I could be my full self. And in the process, I think I lost pieces of myself that I'm now starting to be able to regain. And in that, I am realizing that in living into my embodiment, that being a disabled queer woman in ministry is also activism in and of itself. And my favorite story of that actually has to do with being a parent more than a pastor. Is one day I was at a grocery store and I was turning a corner and someone yelled at one of their children, "Watch out for the wheelchair." Like, I wasn't going very fast. It was fine. Like, everybody was going to be okay. And this little kid, who was probably 5 or 6, turns to her mom and goes, "That's not a wheelchair. That's a mom. I've seen her at my school." And I think about that story all the time when I think about pastoring. and about the kids that are growing up in my church and about the people that come and see me preach on a weekly basis and the way that they will think about disability and particularly being a wheelchair user when they encounter people in the world. And so that has helped me in my own embodiment and I think in my own understanding of how ministry and activism align.
Just like some of the others have said, I see the three as intertwined in various ways and feeding each other. Academics is sort of the most expected answer from me, I think. And my academic work involves disability theology, as I mentioned, but I think it's really nourished by the work I do outside of the academy, which I think is both a mix of, I would call it ministry in a broad way, and has its activism involved as well. So for many years, I've been involved with outdoor experiential education for kids as young as 8 up through 18, both in an interfaith organization that's focused on dialogue towards peace and justice, and at a summer camp, a YMCA summer camp. And so they're in both places. It's about teaching youth how to learn about the expansiveness of what it is to be a person and how to engage one another in those ways. One through specific dialogue with others of religious traditions. And the youth have such exciting questions about persons in so many ways. And at summer camp, last year I did an ADA audit of our camp so that we could introduce more ramps and a sensory space and ways that we can include all campers as best as possible within being in the middle of the woods. And we have had a few wheelchair users join us at camp, which is something that when I was a camper at 7 years old, many moons ago, was not something that we were able to see. And so being sure that in those spaces, all persons are welcomed and celebrated is something that has been really crucial to me and feeds sort of the work that I do. One other thing is I'm a residential minister here at Boston College. So I live in a dorm on a floor of sophomore boys. I do have my own apartment, though, separate from them, thank goodness. And I cover 3 different buildings, some first-year students, some sophomores, and some transfer and international exchange students. So a very wide population there as well. And engaging those students in their questions of spirituality and things that they're learning new about themselves when they're being given resources that they've never had access to before is something that really, again, feeds sort of new questions for me and expansive ways of thinking as well. And also just being someone who is disabled here at Boston College, to be perfectly honest, is something that has been a challenge. It is a hard campus to navigate, as I'm sure many of you are discovering. But with Maddie, who's been here as well, we've been able to advocate for some changes to campus to ensure that it's able to sort of work on small things, bigger things to improve the accessibility here.
Thank you both so much. Thank you all so much. Something that can happen, and this happens a lot in my world because my specific mental health specialty is in trauma and the related disorders that accompany a traumatic experience. Something that I do in my field, and my field can get stuck in, is identifying, let's generously call them challenges, right? So we are obviously hitting a roadblock of some kind. Someone is, again, to be quite generous, not their best self to us. There are physical impediments, literal ones, that make it such that we feel unwelcome or cannot access the literal space that we are trying to get to. It can become something that my husband, who's a journalist, calls admiring the problem. We get stuck in this pattern, especially those of us, all of us, who've been through the Theological Academy in some form. We are great at diagnosing. It could be also called complaining. But it's for the good, right? We really do this. We do this admiring the problem because we want to find a solution. But something that has been a deep gift for me from disability theology in particular are these expansive, outward, growing, hopeful edges. That it's not about just the ADA audit, it's about the beautiful celebration of the fixing of the ramp, right? It's about the opening outward of our theology, of our thinking, of how we are being together as people, that moves us away from this diagnostic mindset and into this flourishing mindset. I'm a Catholic ethicist. Those words are going to come out of my mouth. And something for me that I would love us to discuss is, what do we see as those growing edges, those challenges, yes, but that are also opportunities, be that strictly theological, like in how we're thinking and writing, an insight from a disabled scholar, right, that changed your mind, opened your edges. Again, a story, an experiential human. So thank you for sharing those already. Something that unlocked something in you, in your vocation, in your activism, in your ministry, that you would not otherwise have received, right? That you would not otherwise be working toward if it weren't for disability theology, activism, or ministry. I've reworded this question a little bit, so I'm going to give them a second. I'll give mine. In Catholic ethics in particular, in like traditional Western theological ethics, we get really obsessed with capacities, like deeply, and especially in medicine. 1 in 7 people who seek healthcare today are going to intersect with a Catholic provider, be that the nurse or doctor in front of them or the institution that they walk into. And so those providers are trying to find ways of helping, right, of measuring. And therefore our ethics tends to say, what are the capacities that we're trying to reignite in that person? How does this person need to grow? What do I need to fix, right? What is the problem that I'm going to heal? Now, on the basis of, the first question, especially with a doctor, that's not necessarily the worst question, right? But for me, disability theology gave me the language and the gift to say, "Oy, slow down." Just because someone is presenting with a challenge or something of a difference doesn't mean that that capacity has to meet some sort of norm or be fixed in order to be a complete experience, even with a healthcare provider. And so I would not have this language of challenge to my own field. So when it slips back into, well, how do we make this person normal, right? That's the healthcare question. I can sit in those rooms and just came from a meeting where I had to say this. That's the wrong question. And it is actually a further disabling question in the worst sense. And that you are actually enacting further harm when you're intersecting with a human being and starting from that type of mindset. So what are and that's a gift to me. That's a huge gift that I would not have without my disabled friends and colleagues and without disability theology. So what are some other of those challenges that are opportunities or those gifts that we want to lift up?
So I'm going to speak about a personal experience here. My leg was amputated 2 years ago while I was in the 3rd year of my theology program, my PhD program. I had just finished comps 2 weeks prior and was getting ready to have my leg amputated. And I was really trying to figure out what to kind of make of this because it felt like a pretty big moment in my life. And I wanted kind of a spiritual thing to happen. And as I mentioned, I focus on ritual in my work, some with worship and liturgy as well. And so I got together with some of my friends, specifically from the theology department, and came up with the idea of putting together a creative liturgy, of a way to specify this specific, both special and challenging moment in my life. And so we put together a liturgy of hope and healing. I believe that's what we called it. where there were a few significant moments that differed from a typical Mass. I am Roman Catholic as well. And so the specific moments that I'd want to point out are I had my feet washed by my mother and my sister. And that would obviously be the last time my left foot was washed. And my mom washed that foot because over the course of many, many surgeries, she was the one to help me clean the wounds, the scar, the incisions. And as I had some infections, to be able to help care for those as well. And it was a really poignant moment, one that I still don't always quite have words for, because it was just a moment of real grace, and one that I can still kind of hold as that last experience going into something that was a complete unknown for me. The congregation was filled with fellow students in the department, faculty members, staff members here at BC, as well as my own family and friends. And there was a moment as well in the liturgy where they all stood and extended their hands and prayed over me, which in the Catholic Church doesn't happen all that often. And it was, again, a moment that I struggle to describe because of the amount of deep presence I felt of the Holy Spirit within me. And all of them saying that they will continue to care for me and see me as a full person when this big change is about to happen. And the third moment was during the prayers of the faithful. During one of my previous surgeries, I received a donor bone in my body. And that was something that, again, I was kind of struggling with. I had received this from someone who had passed away, and now I was giving away that gift. Like I hadn't used it to its full potential. And so we specifically prayed for that person and their family as they, again, are still grieving that person. And that was something that, to me, was very important to recognize kind of this gift that had helped me continue to walk somewhat as I had made it through this long stretch of continuous surgeries, and that I was giving that away again in a different way. So this, in total, creative liturgy that there isn't to find in a book about liturgies, was something that was very much tailored to my experience, and one that created a sense of connection and community, and real presence in a way that I had never experienced in my many 28 years of going to Catholic church at that point. And it's an experience that gives me hope about the possibilities of continuing to have creative liturgies that invite people to mark the important moments of their life of transition, and engage their own bodies as they continue to change in important ways.
I don't think it will be a surprise to anyone. We've already sort of talked about it a little bit with BC, but a big challenge of being a disabled person in ministry, especially when if you're not familiar with the Protestant tradition and the UCC tradition in particular, we do something called search and call to find a job, which means that we put out a ministerial profile and people read it and they decide if they want to interview us, and we go around and we interview for positions. And so one of the things that gets in the way of getting a call is physical location, right? A lot of our churches are not accessible. And even our churches that are accessible, what's one place in the church that usually isn't? The chancel, the pulpit, right? And so I actually had a conversation with someone from the church I'm currently at a denominational event. maybe a year before I ended up there. And they said to me, what do you do about that? And I'm like, well, this is what the church that I just served did. And I answered sort of mechanically. And he said back to me something like, oh, yeah, that sounds right. Like, I think if we called someone in a wheelchair, like that's what we'd do. Like we'd do something similar. And I said, yeah, that's what good churches say. That's what just flowed out of my mouth. And he looked at me and said, no, good churches do it first. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right, actually. And one of the things that I have been through over the last couple of years in my setting, I've been in my setting for 5 years. We've had an accessible chancel for 4 months, is going through the process of walking a church through what it means to create this kind of accessible space without me and my disability being the center of that decision, while having them talk about a theology of openness and affirming of all bodies, and a commitment to welcoming all people, and also talking about the chancel a lot as a place to bear witness to who belongs in leadership in a church. And I do think that while my church is a wonderful, wonderful place and a beacon of open and affirming energy, I don't think they would have done this work on the chancel if they hadn't had someone with a disabled body present, going up a very, very rickety and unsafe ramp on a weekly basis that nobody enjoyed, myself included. But I will say that being in the process of that is one of the reasons that I had to deal with a lot of my stuff. I don't know if swearing is okay here. I swear a lot, but my shit. Around, is my body a burden? Right? Is having a disabled pastor a disadvantage for my community? Look at the money they're having to spend. Look at the energy that they're having to put out to do this thing. And what else could we be doing if we weren't doing this? And it really helped me, and I think my congregation, to come to the place of, you can say you want to be welcoming. You can say that all people belong here. You can say that all people belong in leadership. But until our physical structures match where our hearts are, then we're not doing our work or our job. And I think that it moved my congregation forward as much as I also had moments of deep insecurity around what I was asking my congregation to do. I'll tell one other story that I love about one of the reasons I think it's really, really important that we have pastors and ministers and laity of different abilities in our churches is in part because the experience of the sacraments is a little bit different. So one of my favorite things that I love about serving communion in a power wheelchair, my feet are about, 3 feet or 2 feet in front of my body. And so I'm holding the chalice out in front of my feet. And when intinction happens, my feet are covered in communion wine, right? And there is something really beautiful about that, right? It's not going on the floor. It's going on my feet. It's dripping down my legs. Sometimes if a kid really dunks it in there, right? We use big hunks of bread in the Protestant church, so sometimes it gets really wet and nasty. But there is something really beautiful about this idea that somebody who wasn't sitting wouldn't have the same experience. We wouldn't have the same example of a foot washing with all these different people's communion. And one of the things that I have run into in the church, especially now that I'm in the position of being, past my ordination process and just starting to not get called young clergy anymore, is seeing younger folks come up with disabilities and watching how much better they have to be and how much harder they have to work to get to where they need to go. And I recently was talking with a denominational official about the importance of why can't there be mediocre disabled pastors? Yes. We have so many mediocre non-disabled pastors. Can we take a look at this, please? Because we need everybody's body and everybody's experience and everybody to come to the chancel and the pulpit and the table and the pew in order to experience the full image of God. So.
That's a wonderful idea. Okay, So I was thinking about how to answer this question. I apologize in advance that it's going to be a little nerdy related to my area of research. So when I was in my first year of the program, of my doctoral program, I knew that I wanted to do disability theology. I didn't really know what facet of disability theology I was most interested in. Well, mostly because I didn't know all the facets, and we probably still don't. But I came across this idea of crypt time, which I know that some people here may be familiar with. It's basically this concept from the area of disability studies that's trying to name the way that disabled people relate to time, the distinct ways that disabled people relate to time. It includes features of unpredictability, attentiveness to needs in the present moment, and some other facets. And I went to a conference once that was not at all a theology conference. It was on liminality and disability, I think at MIT, like a non-religious institution. And the papers that I had heard on crypt time were primarily construing crypt time as univocally negative. And something that I'm really interested in is how to understand crypt time, or the ways that disabled people relate to time, as potentially a really important, rich, formative resource for thinking about time in general, and specifically for me as a Christian, like how Christianity may call us to relate to time. And exploring this idea in my coursework and now in my dissertation has been so exciting and like life-giving to think about this claim that actually, or perhaps the various ways that people with disabilities relate to time may actually be a more true way of relating to time. So I'm trying to think through all of the complexities of that. And it's just been an idea that I've come across in my studies that has given me a lot of life and hope, and joy, frankly. And that's actually related to another idea that I've come across. I'm trying to, so some of you may know Allison Kafer. I love her. I've never met her. It's my dream. And a lot of her work is kind of pushing back against this idea that like a disabled future is a grim future, or a disabled future is a future that is inevitably and primarily tragic. And she's trying to add a lot of nuance to that conception of disabled futurity. And I think that the place of joy there is really important. So I'm also really excited by the idea of like thinking about the uniqueness of disabled joy and disabled flourishing and disabled creativity, that for me personally, has been mediated to me through my experience of disability. So those are some themes that I think are exciting me at the moment.
I think in this room, you're safe from not being too nerdy. I just feel like I'm sitting and holding just a little bit of what each person has shared, and just like want to just speak tenderness back to all of you, and thank you for what your offerings. And to also say that in terms of challenges, I think one of the biggest ones I think that I continue to confront is when I talk about disability and disability theology, or even like any other theology that I come across that I find useful, womanist theology, you know, when I talk about these things outside of academic spaces and with the communities that are, you know, of my friends and family, there's such a like a fear and trepidation about language and not the conversation ends up being, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I know you studied all that stuff and I don't want to offend you. And then there's also just like being able to sit here and to name distinct pieces of my identity so that I can relate to each one of the people in this room means something. But in other spaces, it becomes like, why do you have to say all, like, why does that need to be said? And I know that there are many people in my life who like have disabilities, but because we already navigate so much with the oppression we face as women, oppression we face as Black and Indigenous people of color, like it just feels like one more thing to add on that doesn't necessarily make life any easier. And then also it can be ubiquitous because there are so many things that, so many ailments that because you already deal with racism that you'll deal with in your life because of racism. So you could say that racism is itself a disabling reality. So yeah, those things feel intertwined and often feel like the thing that like is like the most obvious thing we need to confront about how we talk about race and disability. The other piece I would say that intersects with my work specifically in terms of like terms I found helpful when studying disability theologies, I would say the concept of the fall and falling in Sharon Betcher's work. And I remember when I first encountered it, thinking like there was something there for me to gain from thinking about like the fear of falling, but I had not yet come to a point in my life where like I was, like fully falling. I was holding on for dear life with every possible, way that I could, grabbing hold of whoever and whatever was available to me to sustain me through multiple degrees that I now have. But towards the end of the spring semester last year, I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And that's when I really got to experience like what it was like to like fall and like completely rely on your community. And to also feel like such a deep sense of shame about not being able to like pick myself back up. Like it took the entire summer and fall before I was able to finish my coursework, and I didn't finish until January. And I was just like, why can't I do this? Like, what is this obstacle? Like, why is it so hard to get up and to keep going? And so in the work that I do online, I write this newsletter called A Gentle Landing. And it really is around the concept of the fall, this idea that if we embrace it, this understanding that at some point in our lives, we will have some kind of a fall. What does it look like for that fall to be for the impact of that fall to be lessened by the community that is around you? So the gentle landing is a communal care ethic and a communal care call that I have woven into my work. And so, yeah, so as I think about what it's like to be in a room like this and to know that there are many who occupy the same identities as me who would never be in a room like this, I want you to know that there are some who look like me that you'll encounter in your life who are probably holding on to dear life to prevent themselves from falling in front of you because they don't yet know that you're a person that they can feel safe to see them experience that. And that's who my audience is when I think about the work that I do.
I love that so much. Something that the last panel actually that was held in this room talked about is that part of advocacy in any form, part of doing this work in any form is listening, is sacred listening. And since this panel is, that at the end of our first day and thinking about how we're going to encounter the rest of our time together, what is something that you've heard or has coalesced in the last moment of reflection that you want to lift up? It doesn't have to be solved. It can be a question you want to offer to the room, an insight that you haven't fully formed. I think something that I'm going to take forward from every single thing you guys have said is the recognition of our liminal embodiment and the ways that I want to seek out not to every person, this isn't like a white savior situation, but to say to posture myself in the world in such a way that it's the already and the not yet together in our bodies. And how do I become, if needed, a more gentle landing place for those of whom I work with, the institutions that I work with? How can I be a gentle landing space and also a challenging, testimony to those spaces? I don't have those answers at all, but that's my, I think, question, insight I'm bringing forward.
I'm thinking about a theme that seems to emerge in all of our contributions, which is the importance of interdependence and community. And I know that's not the first time that's been said today. But personally, sometimes I can find it quite annoying to need to lean on community as hard as I do, and the interdependence that's a requisite of being a disabled person. And we've discussed sort of the challenges of that, as well as the moments that really can soften the fall, and the importance of that community being present. I think it might be interesting for us to think about developing that community of interdependence, which can sometimes be a real challenge as disabled persons.
Bouncing off of that, I know I'm wondering, and I wonder if the room is wondering, like, after this work, after the deep dive and the digging that we're all doing in terms of listening to one another's stories and living into this interdependent moment, how do we go and create systems that do likewise when we leave this space? And I think that it is really important that our places of worship and our academic institutions and the ways that the people of God coalesce in different spaces are able to both benefit from the kinds of conversations that have been had and that my colleagues have talked about today, especially poignant talking about ritual and relationships to time and what it means to fall down and what it means to get caught, right? But the communities cannot benefit from that work unless we create systems that allow them access and then continued flourishing. And so I'll be pondering that.
So this past weekend, I was at the Catholic Theological Society of America's annual conference, and there was a breakout session on disability and theology. And I don't want to be a downer here, but it was not a very well attended session. There were 3 or 4 members there. And I was so disheartened by that. And so I think actually today what I want to express is just gratitude to the organizers, everyone who's here, this opportunity for communal conversation, because it just makes me feel so much energy and hopefulness and aliveness around these issues, and like excitement that there are so many people in this room who care deeply about disability and theology and ministry and activism and everything in between. So I think my main expression is gratitude right now.
I'm going to echo something the Reverend shared about the desire to see more mediocrity present in these spheres. You know, I've have a long track record of being excellent. I can show it to you if you want. I can email you the resume. And I say this often to people, and they really think I'm joking. I was like, my one goal in life is to be ordinary. Like, I want to, when people say things like, oh, like, isn't it great that you're the first Black like listing off? No, it's not. It's really not. It's no triumph to reach this peak in the empire. At least not for me. But when I think about how I try to lean into desire to be ordinary is in doing my work in a way that doesn't prioritize the peaks that come from attention from, those who say like, like right now we're like, this topic is really hot. We need you to produce content to do this and to do that and whatever. And it always feels like those moments are going to be promising. Like they're going to lead us somewhere. Like the revolution is coming. Everyone's talking about da 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 da. And we have a history of people who've written who have told us like, no, whenever you see these moments coming, that ain't it. That's just a distraction. Toni Morrison, distraction. But when I think of the work that I do and the posture that I want to lean into, and I also think this may inform or be in conversation with the crypt time idea, the posture of my work is at your leisure. So when I think of what it means for me to study the things I study and care about, and to record and to archive and to notice and to cultivate, like the posture is at my leisure. And if I'm doing it at my leisure, then pleasure is involved, then desire and energy are involved. And when I don't have any of those things, nothing is happening. But it doesn't mean that nothing will happen. Nothing will not happen the entire time. Like that energy will come back and I can honor what my body is able to do. And I am not moving at the pace of other people's curiosities, of other people's priorities, and other people's, just brief spurts of commitment towards the cause that is my lifelong reality.
Amen. Because I can't help myself, the teacher in me, I'll lift up one resource, Miss Adrienne Marie Brown's work on pleasure activism. If you haven't dipped into, she's also the author of Emergent Strategies, which you may have plugged into in your work. But I think for everything we've spoken about today, trying to focus on the joy we can find in the challenge and those growing edges, finding our pleasure in activism is something that I think we can carry through our week, because I know being, as Maddie said, with all of you is an incredibly joyful experience. And I'm so thankful and grateful for all of you. Let's thank our panelists.